Good morning, everyone. We're going to give people a few more minutes to join us, and then we're going to get started. So I'm going to wait to see kind of the waiting room empty out, and then we'll get started. Okay, so we seem to have evened out. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Exploring the Intersection, Generative AI and Employment Regulations. My name's Tawny Alvarez. I'm a partner in Veryl's Labor and Employment Group, and today we're going to be discussing the complex landscape of generative AI within the framework of employment law. Anyone who is keeping abreast of AI issues knows that this is a very large, kind of all-encompassing topic. We really are going to stay within the realm of employment law, how it interacts with employment regulations, and things that HR professionals should have at top of mind when we're talking about AI in the workspace. A couple of housekeeping matters just to note before we get started. For those of you who are not familiar with our webinar series, this presentation is being recorded and it will be emailed to each of you along with a copy of the slides in the coming days. The webinar has also been approved for 1 continuing legal education credit in Maine and 1 SHRM credit. If you're an attorney, we'll be submitting your name to the main bar for CLE credits, so you don't have to provide us with any additional information. We will also email you a certificate for your records along with the SHRM certificate. If anyone has questions during the course of the presentation, please use the Q&A box and we will do our best to answer those questions in real time throughout the course of the presentation. With that, let's get started. To me, it's really important that we start at a foundational level with answering that question of what is AI or artificial intelligence. So we're going to start layman's terms, and then I'll probably get a little bit more technical as we go into it, with the understanding that you do not have to have a huge, broad background understanding technology or a lot of these concepts to really understand how this is going to interplay with the work that you do in employee management and human resources more generally. So in layman's term, artificial intelligence is a sophisticated way of using computers to detect patterns and to perform tasks that are typically associated with human thinking. So in many ways, artificial intelligence is an umbrella term for machine functions that can emulate human processes. There's disagreement in computer scientists about the difference between machine learning and artificial intelligence. We're going to use kind of the broad umbrella term of artificial intelligence, even if we have computer scientists in the room. Some of the things we may be discussing are more machine learning, but it's ways in which we can facilitate the automation of work more generally. One of the well-known forms of AI is ChatGPT. And ChatGPT uses inputs that are created by humans. And one of the things that you're going to want to keep in mind throughout the course of this whole presentation is that it's created by humans. Humans have biases. For those of you who have heard me speak before, I've spoken a lot on unconscious bias and the effect that it has on workplaces, unconscious microaggressions, some of those different concepts. Those are all going to be interwoven as we talk about artificial intelligence, especially as it relates to the data sources that are helping the AI to quote unquote think or helping it in creating its output. So ChatGPT is a language processing tool, and it's trained from information that is found on the internet or that has been input into the program itself from users. So ChatGPT has limitations because it relies on human feedback in order to improve its output and in order to provide accurate answers to users. So anyone who's used pieces of AI in the past or have used ChatGPT may recognize that if you type a question into ChatGPT about something that happened yesterday or last week, you're unlikely to get a response that includes the most up-to-date data and information, because ChatGPT does take some time to pull that data from elsewhere. It's not a self-sustaining tool. It requires human engagement. So if the program that you're using or the model, the artificial intelligence, it has an end date where, hey, it only is using data up until May of 2022, right? It's not going to take into account changes in the law, changes in cultural norms, any of those things. Let's talk about how we're currently using AI probably. And there may be a number of people who are on this webinar who are saying to themselves, Tawny, I do not use AI. I'm staying away from it. I don't like to use programs or software that I don't know anything about or that I don't feel comfortable with. But the interesting thing is that most of us have been using AI for a while and didn't realize it. So let's jump to that next slide. Remember this guy who'd ask you if you needed help writing a letter? It's a form of AI. It's a, he would identify that you were writing a letter and he'd pop up there in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen and say, hey, it looks like you're writing a letter. Do you need help? Now, some people may think that I'm definitely like dating myself by acknowledging him and how we used him in work. But it's important to understand that a lot of the concepts that you hear about AI are taking from older concepts or older pieces of technology that we previously have been using. And the reason I say that is because so many of the things that we're going to talk about during the course of today's presentation build off of a framework of laws and regulations that have been in effect for decades. The important part is that you use your training, your knowledge, and your experience to understand how those concepts now interplay when we're talking about artificial intelligence and ways in which we can use artificial intelligence to help us do our jobs better, but also to be very mindful of the pitfalls that exist within artificial intelligence. So other ways in which you potentially have been using AI and you didn't realize it: predictive text features, whether it's on your phone or whether it's in your email. Anyone who has recent versions of the Microsoft suite of products may be getting an email on Sunday night or Monday morning that analyzes your use of Microsoft products in the last 7 days, or how much time you're spending in meetings or out of meetings. All of those are forms of AI. Also, from a hiring perspective, for employers who have been using third parties to post or assist with collection of resumes from applicants, you likely had the ability to filter those applicants so that you saw the ones that were most closely related to the job tasks or functions that you had posted in the ad itself. Also, I mean, anyone who's been using spell and grammar check for the last few decades, right? Again, another form of AI. Very rarely, I hope, are you going through and blindly accepting all of the proposed edits or changes that Microsoft or whatever other word processing program you use suggests. Because while it has the ability to recognize what a proper sentence should look like and different forms of grammar in the letter you're writing or in the materials you're preparing, it's not always correct. So keep in mind some of these concepts that you have been instituting through your daily work, right? And we're gonna start talking about how you need to institute that mindset when we're using AI. Let's jump to the landscape, Leah, and talk a little bit about like the laws that are currently in effect. So AI executive orders and laws that and I say laws, but really it's executive orders that we have in place. In 2020, the AI and Government Act was instituted, and the purpose of that was for the U.S. Office of Personnel Management to identify skills and competencies that U.S. employees were going to need for AI-related federal positions. In 2021, the National AI Initiative Act took effect, and that provided an overarching framework for a national AI strategy in federal offices and to implement a task force. By 2022, we see the AI Training Act, which directed the United States Office of Management and Budget to establish or provide artificial intelligence training for the workforce that does acquisitions for the US government. In 2022, we saw President Biden issue the White House's blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. And then in 2023, using that blueprint, we saw the executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy AI. And what that did is it established a new standard for AI safety and security to protect Americans' privacy, advance equity and civil rights, stand up for consumers and workers, promote innovation and competition, and generally to advance thought leadership as to AI, both in the United States and around the world. Let's jump to some of the very specific regulations related to the employment landscape. Most of the work that we've seen done in this perspective is from the EEOC. However, we do have language from the OFCCP, as well as some interesting language from the National Labor Relations Board concerning how these administrative agencies view AI and the concerns that they may have regarding the use of artificial intelligence in the work environment in making employment decisions. So in 2021, the EEOC issued the AI and Algorithmic Fairness Initiative, which requires the AI tools that are used to make employment decisions comply with EEOC laws. And you're going to see this as an overarching dialogue throughout the course of the presentation and all the actions that's been taken by administrative agencies since. In 2022, the EEOC issued AI guidance concerning employers' use of software algorithms for job evaluation and hiring decisions, specifically noting concerns regarding potential violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act. In 2023, we see the EEOC provide some technical assistance concerning use of AI and possible Title VII considerations. And then most recently, actually just about 2 weeks ago, OFCCP issued data for federal contractors with a list of key elements that federal contractors should be considering when they're using AI in employment-related situations. We've also seen the regulation of AI from an employment landscape in some state and local perspectives. None in New England. We do see proposed legislation, but the ones that have taken effect, New York City local law 144 took effect in the summer of last year. And it set limitations and requirements on the use of automated employment decision tools to screen candidates for hire and promotion. And specifically, the New York City Law 144 prohibited the use of automated employment decision tools unless that tool had been subject to an independent bias audit within the past year. And that independent bias audit had to be performed by a third party. And employers and employment agencies were also required to make it public on their website the date and a summary of the results of that audit based off of the distribution date. And it had to be within 1 year of the employment decision. Additionally, employers and agencies had to provide notice of an automated employment decision tool was being used, and it had to include instructions for requesting alternative selection processes or any reasonable accommodation. And employers would be subject to civil penalty of up to $500 for a first-time violation and up to $1,500 for successive violations of the law. In 2019, we also saw Illinois enact the Artificial Intelligence Video Interview Act, and that was amended in 2022, but it provides that employers who may be asking applicants to record video interviews that use artificial intelligence to analyze those videos, the employer must notify applicants in writing before the interview. The artificial intelligence will be used to analyze facial expression or consider the applicant's fitness for the position, provide applicants with information before the interview explaining how artificial intelligence works and what characteristics are going to be used to evaluate the applicants, and also to obtain written consent from the applicant to be evaluated using the artificial intelligence program. So while right now in Maine and New England, we don't have specific laws related to AI in the employment relationship, be mindful of these other jurisdictions that have entered into it as it relates to what we're going to see moving forward. Let's also talk about what's pending in federal, at the federal level in Washington concerning AI in the employment relationship. So we'll jump to the next slide. Currently pending in Washington is a number of different bills: algorithmic accountability, stop spying bosses, no robot bosses. They all have a similar intention concerning limitations, in some cases banning, employment decisions, which would include things such as pay, benefits, scheduling, hiring, that are based exclusively on automated decision systems or AI. We also see in Washington multiple bills related to cybersecurity and data privacy issues related to AI, and some bills concerning a national framework related to AI transparency and accountability. And transparency and accountability are two terms you're going to hear used very often when we talk about AI. And in large part, that's based off of the bias that's already been identified in many of these tools and making sure that it doesn't further biased decision making more generally. So with that, let's jump into understanding AI risks in the employment relationship. And we're going to talk generally about approximately 5 different areas that should be at top of mind for you. Please don't believe that just because I didn't touch on a subject that it's not important. Really, these just are the ones that you most often are going to see AI play a role in an increased risk. So let's jump to the next slide and talk about hiring. So when employers use AI for hiring, some of the things that they need to be really mindful about is what are the factors that artificial intelligence or the program is taking into account to assist in making the hiring decision, whether or not it's the data that's given to an ultimate decision maker, whether or not it's ranking applicants based off of their resume, or that there's other factors that are going into it. First, being mindful of the importance of notifying applicants of their right to request a reasonable accommodation in the application process is really important here, because oftentimes you're going to receive, if you're using AI in the hiring process, you're potentially receiving data. And if the individual who's applying for the position was unaware of the process to request a reasonable accommodation for the applicant or the hiring process, you're already putting individuals with disabilities at a disadvantage for the position that's at issue. Additionally, some of the other really common issues that we see concerning the use of machine learning or machine decision-making in the hiring perspective is commonly rejecting applicants from certain protected groups at a potentially higher rate than groups who do not fall within that legally protected arena, favoring one protected group over another. We see this a lot for employers who use some form of video interviews and then have AI analyze those video interviews. The screening out of applicants who potentially have some resume gaps. Those resume gaps could be the result of a disability, could be the result of service in the armed forces. It could be the result of some form of protected leave or other disability. So the screening out as a result of resume gaps can often have a disparate impact. Screening out based off of the answers to certain questions that potentially are favoring one group of people over another. Now, you're saying to yourself, but Tawny, much of what you're saying is not on its face discriminatory. And you're absolutely right. But one of the concepts that really comes into play when we're talking about artificial intelligence and employment discrimination is the concept of disparate impact. And what that means is that you might have a standard in place, right? Where you say, we will not hire anyone who has an employment gap on their resume of over 6 months, right? Okay, it doesn't matter if you're a white heterosexual male who is under the age of 40, or if you are a Hispanic transgendered woman who is 52 years old, right? You would both be treated the same. So isn't that, that can't be discriminatory. The problem is if it has a disparate impact or it adversely affects people within a protected class at a higher level than those who do not fall within that protected class, you potentially have issues under Title VII or the Maine Human Rights Act under a disparate impact theory. And we're going to talk about some of the cases that have brought this forward and have been successful. There's also going to be situations where whatever input you've put in from a screening perspective as to the program in and of itself isn't creating a disparate impact, but on its face is discriminatory. So last year, the EEOC entered into a settlement agreement in which an employer, iTutor Group, agreed to pay a fine of $365,000 as a result of setting up its hiring processes so that it would reject female applicants who were 55 years of age or older and would reject male applicants who were 60 years of age or older who otherwise were qualified for this tutor position. By having those limitations, iTutor Group ended up rejecting more than 200 qualified applicants in the United States based only on their age. So there's both just plain straight discriminatory practices, right? As it relates to setting of age, of we will not look at people who have armed services experience. We will not look at people who, have any religious beliefs set forth specifically on their resume. If they indicate that they're part of a church or a different religious denomination in their interests or hobbies, that it would automatically screen those applicants out of consideration. Those would all be discriminatory aspects that's set forth in the AI, whether or not you formatted that yourself or whether or not it's come from a third party screening process. So those are some of the very distinct aspects. There's also ways in which we've seen AI that uses personality tests, where we're taking the bias that the organization potentially already has, right? Hey, to be successful in this role, you have to have the same personality and personality traits as other people who have been successful in this role. Those type of parameters or screens can also have disparate impacts on individuals who could be successful in the role. So while I've talked a lot about ways in which people can be screened out using AI kind of more generally, there's also the concern that if you're using chatbots in the course of the interview process, that there's cases where the chatbot simply hallucinates and either says or makes things up more generally. It could be making up of data or information concerning applicants. It could be making up information concerning job duties or requirements for the position, or otherwise screening people out who meet some independent, standard that hasn't otherwise been inserted. Being mindful of hallucinations and how those electronic hallucinations could be adversely affecting hiring decisions is also important. And one of the areas we're going to talk about are questions you should be asking an AI provider if you are going to use these tools. Let's jump to some performance tracking and learning and development concepts that you should keep in mind if you're using AI. Again, we're starting kind of from Americans with Disabilities Act reasonable accommodation standard, because most often we're seeing that the group of people who are adversely impacted by the use of AI are individuals with disabilities. So have we appropriately communicated to employees how they can request reasonable accommodations? Do we have set up in our processes and procedures a way in which people know that they can ask for an accommodation, are being provided with accommodations, and that we otherwise have in place fundamentally ways in which we guarantee that those accommodations don't adversely impact our performance tracking. Oftentimes what we're seeing with some of these AI models is a disparate impact on people as a result of protected classifications. The EEOC's most recent guidance suggests steps that employers should take to limit the adverse effect that this can have from a performance tracking perspective. Employers should audit their AI tools to see if they are contributing to employment decisions that are non-discriminatory in nature. You should not have AI making the full decision. These are always things that need to be double and potentially triple checked by real human beings who are living, working, breathing in the space. Consider whether or not there's a possibility that the AI tool imparts some form of a disparate impact. So make sure that whatever AI is tracking or measuring is job related and consistent with business necessity. Are there other less discriminatory alternative ways to track performance that potentially could create a more equal platform for your employees? If you're using AI solutions, software, or tools to make employment decisions, are we making sure that they are subject to inputs that don't disproportionately impact individuals who fall within protected classes? And one of the ways in which to do that is to exercise using the 4/5 rule. And this is a little bit challenging because the EEOC provides you with this guidance to use the 4/5 rule, but then says, yeah, but that should not be the be all and end all for you as an organization. And the 4/5 rule says that you should look at the way in which the data is being provided to you, and make sure that there's not more than a 20% variance in selection between people who fall within a protected class and people who don't fall within that protected class. Because if individuals within the protected class have a variance or are impacted at a 20% or higher rate, then that can be evidence of possible disparate impact more generally. So that's kind of from a performance tracking perspective as it relates to the EEOC's view on things. The National Labor Relations Act, and specifically the General Counsel for the National Labor Relations Board, has set forth its thoughts on how AI is potentially being used and can be used to violate employees' Section 7 rights, and provides employers with guidance as to things that they should keep at top of mind to make sure that they are not adversely impacting Section 7 rights. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, much of what I'm saying are things that many of you already know, but what you need to do is reframe these concepts as it relates to use of artificial intelligence. So, is the AI tool gathering information regarding employee Section 7 activities, right? Even if it's not doing that, Have you communicated to employees how you're using AI so that they don't have the impression that it's being used as surveillance or to otherwise watch or interfere with their Section 7 rights, their rights to concerted activity and to talk about terms and conditions of employment? Are you disciplining employees for protesting the use of artificial intelligence for employee monitoring or management? So if employees are talking about AI as a term or condition of employment, you then have protected conduct. Make sure that you're not disciplining people for what could be protected conduct. Personality tests that potentially are evaluating an employee's propensity to engage in Section 7 rights would be inappropriate. So at a hiring stage, if you have questions that would lead you to garner information about have they ever been part of a union organizing campaign, were they part of unions previously, AI tools seeking to garner that information or garnering that information based off of past work experience could also possibly violate protected Section 7 activities. Using AI to make decisions based off of union representation, using AI that has production quotas or efficiency standards to single out union supporters, failing to provide use of AI technologies to employees. So one of the big things becomes, doing this in a covert way can have really adverse effects. So being open about how your company is using AI, especially as it relates to performance tracking and learning and development, is really important. And recall that AI or the use of AI technology at work could, if you're in a unionized work environment, be subject to mandatory bargaining. So have that in mind. More generally, as we're talking about learning and development, do you have an AI policy at work? Is there a chance that the work product the team members are producing is the result of artificial intelligence and not their own work product? And what larger implications could that have for your organization? A recent survey by Fishbowl that surveyed 12,000 professionals indicated that 43% of respondents admitted to using ChatGPT at work. And of that 43%, 70% said that their managers were unaware of their work-related use of artificial intelligence. So all the things that we normally do to protect information, to keep employees safe, to have policies and practices, all of those still remain in effect when we're talking about the use of artificial intelligence at work. Other risk-prone areas, we're going to jump to that next slide, is things such as leave administration or accommodation administration. Many of you may currently be using third parties or outsource leave administration. That's great, but there's another person who's kind of like doing that work for you. Some organizations are considering now outsourcing that to AI. Be mindful, though, that AI could incorrectly determine employees who are covered or eligible for protected leaves or accommodations. So if you decide to use AI, you need to be double checking it and making sure that the initial determination is correct under the law. Also, make sure that you're not entering secure medical information into an insecure piece of software. And we talk about confidentiality obligations more generally, kind of throughout this presentation, but being mindful that the data that you enter into insecure chatbots or ChatGPT or other forms of generative AI, right, is no longer confidential then. It's then public. It can then be used in response to other individuals' questions. We also see artificial intelligence incorrectly denying protected leave or identifying conditions and saying that they're not eligible for leave when maybe as an organization, we have similar situations that in the past we have granted leave for as a result. Employee evaluations, a lot of the similar concerns that we chatted about as it relates to kind of performance management is also going to come into place. But sometimes when we see these evaluations being performed, we see that the AI is potentially favoring employees who have taken less leave. And the leave the employee may have taken may have been protected in a lot of ways. It could be as a result of a disability or childbirth or caring for a family member with a serious health condition. In some situations, we see it as favoring employees who have credentials that are higher than coworkers. So it's not taking into account maybe work output or the product, but background of the individuals, which can create significantly more risk. And then other times we're also seeing an input into a the machine learning or the artificial intelligence tool in which the metrics in which the evaluations are being garnered from are irrelevant to the employee's job duties or responsibilities. So it's taking elements that aren't essential functions of the job and using that to score the employee's performance, thus having adverse consequences to different individuals as a result of kind of the use of this improper information. Remember that when we're looking at employee evaluations, oftentimes those are tied to a lot of other different things. If you're looking at mass layoffs or separations, are the people who have the lowest evaluations then subject to termination if you fall within a situation where you need to be considering layoffs? It relates to your pay equity issues and raises and promotions. So as you're using AI and employee evaluations, it's really important because it branches off and serves as a foundation for so many of these other tools or decisions that the organization is going to be making down the line. So as we talk about the risks, let's talk about some of the ways AI can help in the creation of documents and policies on the next slide. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about like, hey, here Tawny is. For anyone who's heard me speak before, I like to say I'm just like a dark storm cloud coming in, telling about all the bad things that can happen and all the risk. But let's talk about how it can help a little bit. So on the next slide, human resources can, personnel management can use AI to decrease the time associated with a lot of tasks with some caveats, right? It's not just a wholehearted acceptance of it, but it's something that you need to be very mindful of, and you still need to use your knowledge base to understand, wait, there's a problem here. This doesn't make sense. So one of the ways in which I've seen it used in a helpful way is the creation of policies. So you might come away from this presentation and say, gosh, we don't have a generative AI policy. Could AI help provide you with the building blocks to create one? Maybe, but you want to know, like, what do I need in that policy more generally, like scope, compliance with other policies, making sure that your confidentiality obligations are set forth within there and that people aren't sharing confidential information. How are you auditing the AI tools that you're going to allow employees to use? What training are you going to provide to employees if you do permit AI to be used? What reporting methods should be in place if employees learn that AI is being used improperly? So the creation of policies is one area where AI could be helpful, with the understanding that it serves as a good foundation, but you're going to have to massage and work with it to make it work for your organization. Similarly, job descriptions for any of the participants right now who have no job descriptions for a position and say, I don't even know where to start. I get that a lot, right? Use AI, type in kind of what you're looking for, but then be very mindful about things that are going to be high on the EOC's mind as to concerns. And with this, I did my own little experiment. So let's jump to the next slide. I used ChatGPT, and you'll see my question. I said, please provide a job description for a bank teller. And I apologize that the type here is really small. You're all going to get a copy, and then you can really hone in on the language. But in general, right, If you're in finance, you probably already have a really strong bank teller job description, but you've got some really good starting points here. Ability to assist customers with account inquiries, balance inquiries, account maintenance, strong communication and interpersonal skills, excellent attention to detail and accuracy. Really some foundational things that I think are relevant to that position. But jump down to the physical requirements that ChatGPT thinks is necessary. Ability to lift and carry up to 25 pounds. When was the last time, I don't know if we have any HR team members from financial institutions, but that we needed a bank teller to lift and carry 25 pounds on a regular basis. I mean, is that a real physical requirement? Ability to stand for extended periods of time. Is that a requirement? Could they have a stool? Are there other accommodations that we could provide where these physical requirements could limit the applicants that we are seeing for the position more generally? So while ChatGPT, I think, is really helpful, you need to be double checking that data and information. And let's jump to the next slide, because while AI is helping you either to create the policy or make the decision, it's important to understand the company keeps the liability. So whatever decisions you're relying upon artificial intelligence or machine learning or machine thinking to do, it's still your exposure. The company is still ultimately responsible for whatever decisions that are made based off of the data that's provided. So the intention here is irrelevant. I didn't mean to, that wasn't my intention. That's not an element of the standard that we're looking at here. One of the cases that attorneys in the labor and employment space are following closely right now is the case of Mobley v. Workday, Inc. It's a case in the Northern District of California. And Workday was able to get the lawsuit dismissed late in 2023, but amended complaint was filed. And there was actually a hearing on an amended motion to dismiss the amended complaint on May 14th. And what we see here is a class action lawsuit that alleges that the Workday platform, and Workday works with a ton of different employers and entities throughout the United States, but that it was more likely to deny applicants who were African American, who suffer from disabilities, and or who are over 40. And the plaintiff in the case, who's seeking to represent the class of people who have applied for jobs using Workday, has applied to over 100 positions through the platform and has been denied each time. And you see dozens and dozens of paragraphs talking about the individual skill set, the job that was applied for, and the immediacy of the rejection for the positions. And it alleges that however the AI screening system is set up, the human biases were already adversely affecting certain demographics in making decisions about eligibility for different positions. So that is a case that we are watching very closely. But as we go through this, all elements of what we're talking about, making sure that you understand that whatever decision is made is ultimately the company's decision is really important. And as we talk about that, let's jump to one way in which I think, even if you're choosing not to use AI in the workplace right now, right? You're not using it to help with hiring decisions. You're not using it for employee evaluations or performance management. The place where AI is really playing a massive role right now for employers who don't even have it in their workplace, aren't using it in any places, in investigations. And you're saying to yourself, what do you mean, Tawny? How does it play a role in investigations? Well, let's jump to that next slide. And really what it comes down to is, don't trust the internet or your eyes or your ears. I have had already multiple circumstances throughout the course of this year in which we as a organization, as the client, has found inappropriate text messages or postings online or Instagram accounts or other forms of social media that would violate different policies or practices of the organization that would result in employee discipline or potentially termination in such situations. But we have to be mindful of how AI works and deep fakes. So deep fakes are the transforming existing content for another person. So I know you see it a lot in news media about like, oh, fake news, those type of things. But what we're seeing more of is employees who are trying to adversely impact other employees by creating either these fake profiles or otherwise having people whose identities are being stolen. And it could be someone who knows them and who has intentions of making their life more difficult. And in other situations, it's just, you know, some type of scam or other attempt to adversely impact the person. One example of this is there was a Pikesville, Maryland principal who went viral based off of a recording in which he was making racially insensitive and anti-Semitic remarks. He went to the police. He said, "This isn't me. This is a deep fake." The school district put him on a leave of absence, and it took months to prove that this was a deep fake generated by AI. The principal had never said those things, and it was all AI generated. When you're seeing things online, when people are giving you video or images of people outside of work, that it's not your own data that you've created, maintain a zero trust mindset. Prioritize the critical thinking skills that all of you have and that have gotten you to this place within your organization and your career. And also check elsewhere. Are there parts of this video or image that are publicly available elsewhere that individuals could use to adversely impact this person and decision-making surrounding it? The other aspect of investigations more generally that we need to keep in mind from an AI perspective is employee surveillance. So let's jump to that next slide and talk a little bit about employee surveillance. AI monitoring of employee activities, as we discussed previously, could violate employees' Section 7 rights under the National Labor Relations Act and thus their Section 8A rights if it would interfere in the engagement and activity protected by the National Labor Relations Act. So if we're using surveillance, we need to make sure that it's narrowly tailored to address the business needs of the organization. I highly recommend that notice is provided, whether it's in the employee handbook or the policy manual, depending on what type of organization you are, that you have postings indicating that recording is in progress. Keep in mind state and federal recording laws, right, as it relates to voice recording, video recording, general surveillance, as well as your obligations under the National Labor Relations Act. And then all the elements that I discussed previously concerning ways in which General Counsel for the National Labor Relations Board has concerns that this could adversely impact employees' Section 7 rights. One of the ways in which you may have recently learned kind of some of the ways in which video conferencing technologies are developing and evolving are, you know, Zoom. You can now get transcription of Zoom recordings. So you can have your Zoom recording and it can transcribe it during it. One thing employers should be mindful of is there shouldn't be a policy or a practice where senior leaders or managers are entitled to, you know, or receiving every recording that's done on the system or transcripts of all the meetings. Those are things that would decrease employees' feelings or beliefs that they could discuss terms or conditions of employment in, I don't want to say in a safer space. I mean, for employees who are working remotely, use of Zoom or those type of things may be the only way in which they're able to discuss protected rights as to terms and conditions of employment. So people are now scratching their head and saying, Tawny, next slide, are you saying that we should not be using artificial intelligence? And the good news is, next slide, No, that's not what I'm saying. Pretending AI doesn't exist, refusing to use AI, none of that is the solution here. I recognize that for almost all companies, the use of AI in some format is necessary to remain competitive. For those of you who read, when you registered, if you looked closely at the program description, we titled the program through the use of AI. The first time I typed into ChatGPT, hey, give me a title for this program, it didn't come up with a title that was going to fit the parameters of what we were talking about. But by my third try, less than 2 minutes in, I was able to get 7 really solid titles that I was like, gosh, these could work, right? Using AI to come up with some of these things, right, is helpful. A task that could have taken 10 or 15 minutes has now taken you 90 seconds. You have to, however, recognize that all the laws and concerns that previously have applied to employers still apply, right? There's still the concerns as to maintaining confidential information, trade secrets, proprietary information. And we need to make sure that we check and then that we double check to make sure that the tools that we're using are in compliance with our culture, are in compliance with confidentiality and security interests that the organizations have, and are free from bias that could adversely impact or create liability under state and federal laws regarding how we interact or engage with our employee population. How do we do that? We have to question vendors if we're using artificial intelligence as to their inputs, because whatever the vendors' biases are, those biases become your organization's biases. And I've unfortunately had this conversation with vendors in the past, and I've said things such as, explain to me how that works, or explain to me what the inputs are. And in a lot of situations, they'll say that's proprietary. We don't share that with anyone. And to me, the answer is, okay, this isn't going to work then, because if I don't understand your inputs, then it's not a product that we can use and be confident that the biases that could be there are not there. While it's important to check the input, we also have to check the output. So as it relates to hiring decisions, right? Are we seeing applicants that are coming from diverse backgrounds, but every candidate that ultimately is coming in for an interview or getting to the second round, are they all cookie cutter images of each other? And if so, what is the filtering mechanism that's screening out kind of all of these other individuals who potentially could be successful in the position? So while I've just given some generalities, let's get into even more specifics. On the next slide, what does this look like specifically, right? From a hiring perspective, if you're using AI to assist you with interviewing, to assist with the applicant pool, does the AI itself require an interface that's accessible to as many individuals with disabilities as possible? If the current interface is not accessible, are there alternative formats that the material can be made available? If it's only available online, is there a way to get a printed copy of it, to have individuals who may not have access to a computer or may have visual impairments to still be able to apply for the position? If the individual does have visual impairments, are there text readers available, and does the program work well with a text reader? Are there any limitations as to the alternative formats that could be available to individuals with disabilities? And if so, has the organization, whether or not the third party who's providing the platform or your organization, figured out another way to engage similarly in the process for individuals who do have limitations that could interfere with their ability to use that process? Asking the vendor whether or not they've performed audits to identify any biases with the algorithm or the materials that are being used for the input. And asking for the data concerning those audits. It's not just, did you audit it, and they say yes and you move on, but understanding what traits and characteristics are you auditing? Were there any correlations with adverse impact related to disabilities or other protected statuses? Make sure that we are communicating appropriately with candidates and employees about our reasonable accommodation processes, alternate ways in which tests or performance management tools can be instituted, and making sure that there are multiple ways in which reasonable accommodations can be requested or provided is really important. If we go to the next slide, there's some additional steps that can be taken as well, as it relates to performance evaluations. A lot of this stuff, people could be saying, Tawny, this is all stuff that we should be doing whether or not we're using artificial intelligence or we're not using artificial intelligence. And you're absolutely correct. But remembering that while we're bringing in kind of new data or new processes, that we're also not forgetting about the old. All I can think of is back to Girl Scouts, make new friends, but keep the old. Like, there's going to be some try and true ways in which you're going to make sure you still weave through your process while you're instituting evolving practices that can make your lives more easier or more productive generally. So training our staff as to how they should respond to requests for accommodations. This is primarily once we have our applicants have been hired and we're moving through with performance management or performance review. Auditing our current evaluation process to determine if we're seeing disadvantages for individuals who have either been provided with reasonable accommodations or who have recently taken some form of a protected leave or who fall within another protected category, using the EEOC's 4/5 rule to just look at the data and to determine, is there a trend here with the data? And if so, could our screening processes, or could some other form of technology be interfering with the data that's being produced more generally? Taking that audit, and then if there are gaps more generally, that we're going to edit the process, kind of that constant cycle of making sure that we are keeping in mind what our process is and making sure that it's the best possible process, free of bias as much as possible. If we're using that third party, we are going to make sure that we understand their process and attempt to eliminate bias as much as possible from that third party platform. And whether or not that's through the inputs, whether or not it's through auditing the outputs, both ways in which we can assist in decreasing risk and liability. And then finally, making sure that we really only are looking at the essential job duties and functions of the position. So things that are truly relevant to the position. It's important to look at everything holistically, but are the holistic elements that we're taking into account the ones that are truly relevant to us determining whether or not a person can be successful in the position or not. And with that, surprising, but somehow we're all done. So we are at the end of the presentation. I appreciate everyone's attention. I recognize that there was a lot of information that we squeezed into 58 minutes. I appreciate your attention. And really the big thing is, remember that the knowledge base that you already have about how to provide a work environment that's free from discrimination and harassment and reduces risk more generally to the organization are the same parameters that you're going to keep at top of mind, even when you're using artificial intelligence and generative AI more generally in the work environment. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you so much.